All right, this is going to be the last college football picks video of the entire season, and we only have one game to discuss. But boy, is it going to be a great game, a game for the ages. This one's going to go down in the history books. Ohio State and Alabama will be playing for the 2020 National Championship. Before we preview the game, we got to understand how we got here. If you forgot, during the offseason, there was a global pandemic, so that was fun. And we didn't know if we were going to play college football. It was like, okay, well, the only teams playing German soccer is playing in front of cardboard cutouts. What is this? And are we going to be able to play football? And each conference has their own sort of thing. The SEC goes, we'll play 10 conference games. And the ACC says, yeah, we'll do something like that. The Big 12 says we're in. The American says we're in. All these conferences are in. The Big 10 and the Pac-12, they say, no, it is unsafe to play. We're out. We're not doing that. And Justin Fields, probably maybe not the most vocal person, but the biggest name, and what caused the most discussion about this is him and all of his Ohio State buddies were petitioning and begging to have a season. And for the first, I would say half or maybe first third of the college football season, it was only the SEC, the Big 12, and the ACC playing football. And, some teams have limited crowd capacity, some have none. And you see that all these teams are doing really well, and they're able to put on a season with some problems, but nothing really major. And then the Big 10 says, yeah, we're back in, and they wanted to play some games. So they were going to play 8 conference games, but they come up with these wacky COVID protocols. The CDC says you get a quarantine for 10 days if you get COVID. They say you need a quarantine for 21. And then the very first game with Wisconsin and Illinois, Wisconsin comes up, lights the world on fire, and then their quarterback gets coronavirus. Their entire quarterback room gets coronavirus. They have to forfeit they have to cancel 3 games, and you're thinking, is a Big Ten team going to get into the playoff if they finished 5-0? And the consensus was no, they would not be able to get in. But eventually, Ohio State finishes the regular season 5-0. They make it to the Big Ten championship. They win, and they made it to the college football playoff. So let's take a deep dive. So the fact that we made it to the championship game after all of this insaneness throughout the season is wild. So I think we're going to take a deep dive through each team's season. For context, Alabama's first game was on September 26th against Missouri. Ohio State's first game was on November 21st against Indiana. Or no, their first game was on October 24th against Nebraska. So they started a full month after Alabama did. Let's take a deep dive to Ohio State's season first. So they have had a very unique season. They're sitting at 7-0 right now. They come out first game against Nebraska, absolutely wiped the floor with them, 52-17. That's expected. Their second game at Penn State. Now, I thought this was going to be a big problem for Ohio State because they're on the road. They're playing probably the second best team in the Big Ten. And before the Big Ten season started, I picked Ohio State to lose this game. Well, then Penn State comes out, they lay an egg against Indiana. And so then we kind of thought Ohio State was going to win the game. They won the game, but Penn State has actually given them one of their best fights throughout the season. They won 38-25 in Happy Valley. They go out, they roll over Rutgers at home, 49-27. Their game against Maryland gets canceled due to coronavirus with Maryland. Okay, and now all of a sudden they have a matchup against a top 10 ranked Indiana team. Now, no one really gave Indiana a shot in this game, but I said I wouldn't be surprised if they hold it close. And all of a sudden, this game's for the division. If Ohio State loses this game, Indiana wins the division. They're going to the Big Ten championship. And this was a crazy game, back and forth. Ohio State was up 35-7 in the third quarter. Indiana comes roaring back. They make it a one-score game, but just ran out of steam at the end. Ohio State wins 42-35 and basically locked up the division. Their next game against Illinois was canceled. All hell broke loose in their program. They have a ton of COVID cases. Ryan Day and 20 players have it. They have to cancel that game. And then here was the discussion. So the Big Ten came up with a rule that you have to play 6 games to qualify for the Big Ten championship. So all they had to do was play their last 2 games against Michigan and Michigan State, and they would be going to the Big Ten championship. They go out, they play Michigan State, they absolutely demolish them 52-12. And then the game against Michigan. Michigan, not a great team. They're absolutely terrible this year. Would they play, or are they going to just sit back, not play because they don't really need to, because they were dealing with a lot of coronavirus issues, and that's what they chose to do. So Ohio State, they end the regular season at 5-0. It doesn't look like they're going to qualify for the Big Ten championship, but the Big Ten changes their rules and allows Ohio State to join the Big Ten. Was this fair for Indiana? No. If you make a rule, you should live by it. But they did beat Indiana, and they were the only undefeated team in the Big Ten. So now they make it to the Big Ten championship with a matchup against 6-1 Northwestern, a team that boasts a very strong defense. But you thought Ohio State should have no problems beating Northwestern, and they had problems beating Northwestern. Northwestern, they hung around in that game. They were up 10-6 at halftime. They were up for a majority of this game. Their offense just sort of fell apart. The Ohio State Buckeye offense, Justin Fields had by far his worst game that I ever saw. The final stat line on Justin Fields, 12 of 27 for 114 yards, no touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. But Trey Sermon had 29 carries and 300 yards. That sort of led them in that second half where they finally ended up waking up. And they are announced as the number 3 team in the college football playoff, and they're going to be taking on Clemson. Now, there was not much optimism for Ohio State, at least from what I saw. So they were by far the better team. They had a way better team than Clemson last year. They had Chase Young, Jeff Okudah, all these studs on their team. And they outplayed Clemson for a majority of the game, but they settled for too many field goals, few shaky calls from the refs, and a bad interception by Justin Fields at the end of the game, and Clemson comes away with the win. So now you're thinking, I don't know. Yeah, they're a good team. They still have some players from that team, but it felt like last year was their year, and they didn't come through last year. And you kind of had the feeling that they were just going to run out of steam against Clemson. And in this game, the legend of Justin Fields was born. The Justin Fields evolved from great player to an Ohio State legend. Now, this guy was always highly touted coming out of high school. He was the number 1 overall player in the country. And here, after playing high school football in Georgia, he committed to Georgia. A lot of people forget about this. He's the highest player Georgia's ever signed. And he was a freshman, and he couldn't get into the game. Kirby Smart decided to start Jake Fromm, and this guy just couldn't get into the game. And so he decides, I'm not sitting behind this bum Jake Fromm. I'm going to go transfer to whoever wants me. Ohio State, they could use a quarterback after Dwayne Haskins left. They pick him up, and he immediately becomes the highest rated player out of high school to ever play for Ohio State. And he had a great first season. A lot of touchdowns, not a lot of only 1 interception in the regular season, but he sort of just ran out of steam against Clemson, and you're like, yeah, he's a really, really good player. He's going to get drafted into the NFL, but it felt like there was a ceiling on him, and it felt like making it to the playoffs was the ceiling. And in this game against Clemson, he went 22 of 28 passing for 385 yards, 13.8 yards per catch, 6 touchdowns. Absolutely lit up the Clemson Tigers, and Ohio State wins the game 49-28. It was in this game that Justin Fields evolved from great player to legend in the Ohio State program. And the motivation was there for this game. Ryan Day had 29-23, the score of their first game against Clemson, up on the walls all over the place. And you could tell they came out with a motivation in this game, and they won. And that is how they got here. Now we need to look at Alabama. Now, coming into the season, Alabama was ranked number 2. I did not think they were going to be that great. In the game, when Mac Jones played at the end of last year, when Tua was hurt, he went 2-1. I think he beat Michigan in their bowl game. He beat someone else, like, I don't know, Mizzou or someone. But he lost to Auburn and did not look great against Auburn. And I didn't see the optimism around Mac Jones. I thought that Mac Jones was going to not play very well. And by midseason, true freshman Bryce Young was going to come in and play for Alabama. I couldn't be more wrong. Mac Jones absolutely lit the world on fire along with receivers Devonta Smith, and Jalen Waddle, and more on Jalen Waddle in a minute. So they start off their season against Missouri. They absolutely crack them up and down the field, 38-19. They play number 13th ranked Texas A&M, who I thought was a really great team. Texas A&M really deserved a spot in the playoffs. Kellen Monder, they're a great team. Alabama comes in, they absolutely wipe the floor with them, 52-24 on their home field. A bit of a scare in Oxford against Ole Miss. Ole Miss, they put up quite a bit of points on them, and this is where you started to see concerns with Alabama's defense. You're thinking, man, they gave up 48 points to the Rebels. Lane Kiffin basically did whatever he wanted on offense. Good for them. Ole Miss doesn't have a defense. They were able to score 63 points, but you saw some concerns of their defense. And then they had a game of the century type matchup against number 3 ranked Georgia at home. And they were down at halftime to the Bulldogs. There were even more, like I said, concerns with their defense. They gave up 24 in the first half to Georgia. They were down by 4. And they lit it up in the second half. Georgia did not score in the second half, and Alabama put up 21 in the second half, winning the game 41-24 and really asserting themselves as a national competitor. And that is where the defense found their fire. Next week against Tennessee, Tennessee only scored 17 points. They won 17-48, but this game came with a cost, a very high cost, and it was top receiver Jalen Waddle. On the opening kick return of the game, Jalen Waddle suffers a terrible, terrible leg injury, and it sounded like he was going to be out for the entire season. And he hasn't played since then. And after that, I said, Alabama might be in trouble because what makes them so good is they have these 2 dynamic receivers, Jalen Waddle and Devonta Smith, and John Mechie as a third receiver. You can mix him in a little bit. But with Jalen Waddle out, they're going to focus a lot of attention on Devonta Smith. And if they could shut him down, you may have unlocked Pandora's box for beating Alabama. But Alabama they didn't really have another tough game after that. They had Auburn, and that was basically it until the SEC championship. They take on Mississippi State. They win 41-0. That's great. They take on Kentucky. They win 63-3. They play Auburn. They win 42-13. And so if you're counting, since the Georgia game where they gave up 24 points in the first half, they only gave up 33 in the next 4 games. They played absolutely lights out. Against LSU, they win 55-17. And this is where the Devonta Smith show took over. It's where it absolutely took over. They were throwing to this man on nearly every single play, and he found himself open on every play, and Mac Jones was just feeding it to him. He was having, through this stretch, the most sensational season from a receiver I've ever seen. He was playing absolutely phenomenal. You find him on Heisman lists. You're like, this guy might have an outside chance of winning the Heisman Trophy. Against Arkansas, their last game before the SEC championship, Devonta Smith returns a punt for a touchdown, and that felt like his Heisman moment. This guy's returning punt because they originally had Jalen Waddle returning punts. Now with Devonta Smith returning punts, you're like, this is this guy's time to shine. He's been the best player in college football after Jalen Waddle went down, which is not what a lot of people were thinking would happen. Against the Gators, they absolutely lit it up in the first half, up 35-17. The Gators clawed back. They made it a one-score game, but Alabama eventually exploded in the fourth quarter. They won 52-46, the consensus number 1 overall team and championship favorite, and they had no problems against Notre Dame in the first round of the playoff, winning 31-14 against the Irish. A very good Notre Dame team. I think they held Bama to their lowest point total on the season. Yes, Alabama has only had 2 games where they've scored less than 40 points. And it was most recently against Notre Dame in the Rose Bowl, and then the first game of the season where they scored, woe is me, only 38 on Mizzou. They've scored 40, 50, and the one game 60 in every single game, and that is where they find themselves against Ohio State. Now, this is going to be a very interesting game. I love how these teams match up with each other. They both have very strong offenses, and their defenses are both not great. I mean, Ohio State's defense, they played pretty well against Clemson. But part of what made their defense so great is their offense was staying on the field for a while. And that's what they're going to have to do today. I mean, not today, on Monday. Ohio State, they're going to have to eat up the clock and keep the ball away from Alabama. Alabama will score against Ohio State's defense. The biggest problem with Ohio State is their second. They have a great pass rush, right? Great pass rush. Their secondary is not great. And with the speed and electricity that Devonta Smith, Heisman winner Devonta Smith, brings to this team, Alabama will get their points. If Ohio State's going to want to win this game, they need to control time of possession. They need to run the ball with Trey Sermon. And this man, in the last 2 games, has 530 rushing yards. That is an Ohio State record for any 2-game stretch, and he did that in the Big Ten Championship and in a playoff game. He's been absolutely phenomenal, and they're going to need him to show up in this game, and they're going to need to run the ball and eat up as much clock as they can, because Bama not only scores, they score fast. And Bama has the way better defense in this game, so I think they're going to need to wear Alabama's defense out with some long drives, keep them on the field, and that's how Ohio State's going to win this game. Currently, this game, Alabama opened at a 7.5-point favorite. That has moved up to 8. They are currently an 8-point favorite. The money line, Bama is minus 270. Ohio State is plus 220. And the over-under for this game is 75. I think that tells you how these teams, they can put up points at a very high rate. If you want to compare position by position quarterback, I think Justin Fields is better than Mac Jones. Running back, I think Najee Harris is better than Trey Sermon, but man, has Trey Sermon looked good. The Oklahoma transfer has been absolutely phenomenal. Receivers, now Bama obviously has the best receiver and the best player in this game, Devonta Smith. That's not to take anything away from Ohio State's receivers. Chris Olave played like a star in that game against Clemson. He is going to be a big factor in this game. And remember what I said about Jalen Waddle? He might be able to play this game. Early this week, he was cleared to practice. Now, it's uncertain if he is going to play in the game. What I would imagine that they're going to do is they're going to give him limited snaps, and they're going to use him as a decoy. They're going to use him as some sort of eye candy to shift Ohio State's attention, to make them put equal attention on Devonta Smith and Jalen Waddle, but they're going to use him as a decoy to get some good matchups, maybe throw it to him a few times. I don't expect Jalen Waddle to have a huge impact in this game. I do think if he's able to play, he will. I just don't think he will have that much of an impact on the game. Offensive line, it's Bama. Bama has a great offensive line. So does last day, but Bama's offensive line is ridiculous. Pass rush, I give it to Ohio State. Their pass rush is always great. It always will be great. But it'll be interesting how they shape up against Bama's offensive line. Linebackers and secondary, it's Bama in both spots. They have Dylan Moses at linebacker and Patrick Surtain at defensive back. They have a great back end of their defense. But I think Ohio State's offense matches up better. I think both teams' offenses match up better against the respective other team's defense. So expect a lot of points. And I really went back and forth with this a bunch. I mean, I thought it was going to be clearly Alabama, but then you look, okay, they both played. We know Clemson is better than Notre Dame. Ohio State beat Clemson by 21. Bama only beat Notre Dame by 17. And Ohio State really looked like when I watched the 2 playoff games, the best team I saw was Ohio State. They looked like the best team, and they looked like a national championship winner. But, I mean, that's not really to take anything away from Alabama, but that's just what Ohio State looked like. But then you look at the struggles Ohio State's secondary has had this year, and I don't really know. My final assumption is that both of these teams are going to put up their points. It could come down to who has the ball last. It's going to be an absolutely wonderful game, but my final score prediction is going to be 45-41 in favor of Alabama. This is a 50-50 for me. It really is. I don't know. Neither one of these teams is going to run away with this game. I think it's just going to be back and forth throughout the entire game. No team's going to pull away until the end. The reason I'm picking Alabama is I don't have any trust in their secondary to guard Devonta Smith. Because, yeah, they have a great pass rusher. If they can get to Mac Jones, that'll help them a lot. Devonta Smith is open within 2 seconds on every single play. I mean, it seems like he's one step ahead of whoever's guarding him on every single play. Now, what I expect the game plan from these teams, Alabama, they're going to start running the ball. They're going to run the ball a lot to open the game, and they're going to make Ohio State commit to the run, and that's where they're going to open up Devonta Smith in the passing game. And with Ohio State, I see them coming out with a very balanced approach. I don't think they can get too predictable on offense because Bama will just eat that alive. I think they go with a healthy dose of passes and runs. They're going to have to control the clock and keep the ball away from Alabama. But I just think Alabama is going to end up taking this one. I think the experience also gets to him this game. This isn't to say that Ohio State doesn't have experience in big games. In fact, they beat Alabama the last time they played in the 2014 Sugar Bowl in the first ever college football playoff. I like Nick Saban's head coaching experience more than Ryan Day. And Nick Saban's boys will be prepared for this game, and that's why I think Alabama is going to end up coming away with the win. This is not anything against I have nothing against Ohio State. I think they're going to really show up in this game. It's going to be an absolutely wild game. I just see Alabama pulling it out in the end. So I hope you guys like this in-depth preview and analysis, and I will be streaming the game. You want to see my here? I'll show you my thumbnail. Here, I'll show you my thumbnail because I already came up with a thumbnail. Let me find it. Look at that absolute beauty. That thumbnail is an absolute beauty. Game's going to be played in Miami. So I don't know how many fans are allowing, but if you get to go to this game, you are a very lucky person because, yeah, you're just a very lucky person. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.